If you're serious about YouTube, you need the right camera. And I realize the right camera for you really depends on your style of content. And there's a lot of different content on YouTube. So the right camera for you might be completely different for someone else. And figuring out what features you need for your style of videos can be pretty confusing. So in this video, let's do a deep dive and look at the best cameras for YouTube and figure out which one is right for you based on your style of content and budget. And as always, I'll leave links down below with the best pricing on all the cameras. Now, when it comes to finding the right YouTube camera, there's a few key features that are simply non-negotiable. These are bare minimum features you have to have in a camera for it to be a decent or even a good YouTube camera. Starting with 4K video at least 24 or 30 frames per second. But some of these cameras can shoot even faster at 4K at 60 frames per second or 4K at 120 frames per second. And all of these cameras have to have top-notch autofocus with perfect face and eye tracking. This way you can simply sit there and focus on the creativity and talking to the camera and leave something boring like focus to the camera. And all of these cameras also have a microphone input so you can get the best possible audio. And of course, all of these cameras also have a flip out screen so you can see yourself. Although I definitely recommend having a monitor because you'll be able to see yourself better. And also if you're far away from the camera, that tiny little screen isn't going to do much. So all of the cameras we talk about today are going to have these features as a bare minimum. And this way I can focus on telling you the most interesting part of these cameras and not have to repeat any info. So the most common style of video that everybody makes, including myself, is a talking head video. This is where you sit down in front of the camera, give it information, and there's a little bit of B-roll sprinkled in. For this style of video, you want to make sure your video and audio quality is as good as possible because 99% of this video will just be you talking. And there's actually two really solid options for this style of video simply because of how good the 4K is in these cameras, and that's the Canon R7 and the Sony A6700. The reason that I pick these two cameras is because they actually downsample their 4K video. This is where your camera takes a higher resolution like 6K, 7K, or 8K and squeezes it down into a 4K file. This way you can get a smaller 4K file that's much easier to edit, but you'll still get the detail and clarity of a 6K or 7K sensor. And the Sony A6700 actually has a 26 megapixel sensor and it downsamples 6K video into 4K at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. So you basically get 6K video in all of your frame rates. And the A6700 can also shoot 4K at 120 frames per second. It's not downsampled and it also comes with a pretty heavy 1.6 times crop, which zooms your image way in. But it's a really cool feature to see in a camera like this at this price point, and slow motion can be a really useful B-roll tool. And the Canon R7 downsamples its 4K from a 32 megapixel 7K sensor, which is basically going to give you just shy of double the resolution of 4K. And you can really see the difference when you put regular 4K next to downsampled 4K. And the Canon R7 lets you record 4K downsampled from 7K at 24 and 30 frames per second. It can also record 4K at 60 frames per second, but it's not downsampled in the R7. And both cameras have at least an hour of recording time before you get any sort of overheating warning. And depending on what the temperature is where you're recording, you might be able to record for even longer than an hour. But speaking as someone that does this full time, it's really hard to record for more than an hour at a time without needing a break yourself. And both of these cameras also have log profiles built in for added dynamic range and more flexibility with your colors. And this way you can take these cameras, either make them look really cinematic or simply just punch up your colors to make the video look more appealing. Plus, the screens on these cameras is also touch sensitive. This way you can simply navigate your camera and change all of your major settings by simply tapping, and you also get touch autofocus. And both of these cameras also have phenomenal smartphone apps that directly connect your camera to your phone, either wirelessly or using a USB cable. And this way, with the app, you also get a wireless feed of whatever your camera's seeing. You can also use the app on your phone to change not only your major settings, but also change autofocus. And overall, it's kind of like having a second screen for your camera. One thing that YouTubers often forget when picking their camera is that you also have to make sure you get the right lens to get that classic YouTube look. And both of these cameras have affordable wide lenses available to get that classic YouTube look. The R7 has the STM 16mm or STM 35mm lens, and both of these lenses are going to be perfect for a sit-down talking headshot. And with the Sony A6700, you have way more options because you can use official Sony lenses or third-party lenses, and the two lenses I like the best is the Sigma 16mm or the Sony FE 24mm. And both the Canon R7 or the Sony A6700 is going to give you a world-class, top-notch talking head setup for YouTube. Now, another style of video that's really popular on YouTube is vlogging, or simply on-the-go content, where you're talking to the camera, but you're not sitting down in a comfy room like this. And there's actually a few really good options for this type of video that I want to talk about. The first one being my personal favorite, the Sony ZV-E10, but I still have other options for vlogging and on-the-go content later on. The Sony ZV-E10 is actually part of the Sony ZV line of cameras that was specifically designed from the ground up for social media content creators in mind. So it's designed exactly for their workflow. It has a single button to go between photo, video, and slow motion, making it way faster to operate than a standard camera with a mode dial, and two separate record buttons for photo and video. And there's a single button at the top of the camera that instantly adds more background blur to your video, giving you more of a cinematic or professional video look. And the Sony ZV-E10 also has a built-in microphone that gives you really solid audio even in busy environments, which is exactly what vloggers need. And this helps keep the size of your camera down and keep it pocket size, but it also saves you money by not having to buy another microphone. But if you do want the best possible audio, shotgun mics are obviously the way to go. And Sony actually makes really great compact shotgun mics that attach to your camera via the flash mount, so there's also no messy wires. And the Sony ZV-E10 has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is pretty typical for this type of camera. But the sensor is really good in low light, which is perfect for vloggers that are often working in tricky lighting conditions or simply vlogging at night. And thanks to that 24 megapixel sensor, the 4K video in the ZV-10 is downsampled from 6K. So at 4K 24 and 30 frames per second, you're really getting the quality and detail of 6K video. And the ZV-E10 also has a side articulating screen with touch autofocus. However, it's not touch sensitive when it comes to menus and changing settings. However, you can still connect the ZV-E10 to your smartphone using the Sony Creator app and get all the benefits that you have in the A6700. Now, if you love the ZV-E10, but you just wish it was smaller in pocket size, luckily we have that, and that is the Sony ZV-1 Mark II. What makes the ZV-1 special is that one, it's a pocket-sized camera, but you get all of the design features from the ZV-E10. And the second thing that makes this camera special is that the built-in lens is perfect for vloggers and content creators, which is an 18 to 50mm lens with a variable aperture between f1.8 to f4. Basically, on the wide side, you're going to get a shot that's wide enough to show you and the environment around you, which is great for vlogging. And on the telephoto side, you're going to get a great lens for portraiture and detail shots. And because of that wide 1.8 aperture, you're going to get great results in low light shooting, but you're also going to get more of that blurry background effect when you're on the wide side vlogging. And inside the ZV-1, you have a 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor, which is also very good in low light, and you'll get great results even as high as 3200 or 6400 ISO. And the ZV-1 Mark II also has this really cool features that I know vloggers and content creators are going to love, and that is cinematic vlog mode. This is where it basically adds black bars to the top and bottom of your video, but you can add a customizable filmic or cinematic look to your footage. And this is a really useful tool that you can get a cool cinematic look in camera with just a few clicks. If you're someone that's new to cameras and you don't really know what you're doing with color grading, this is a really helpful tool. So if you're looking to vlog or shoot any kind of on-the-go content, I think your best bet is the ZV-E10 and the ZV-1 Mark II, specifically because this line was developed for you guys, for vloggers and content creators, and it has the exact features you guys need for a fun workflow and an easy shooting experience. Now, another thing that's becoming really popular on YouTube is podcasting, which isn't surprising because personally, I'm always listening to a podcast. People love long-form videos where they can spend hours with a creator, but in order to be able to record videos for hours and get the kind of audio quality you need where people enjoy listening to it for hours is really tricky, and you need some really specific features in your camera. And for podcasting, there's only really one camera that I recommend. There's no competitors, and that is the Sony FX-30. It has the same sensor as the Sony A6700, so you get the same sensor, the same frame rates, and most of the same specs. But it comes in a cinema body that has a built-in fan, which gives you no record limit on your video, so you never need to worry about this camera overheating. And when it comes to professional cameras with a built-in fan, the FX-30 is also the lowest price point. And you can also pair the FX-30 with a top handle that gives you 2 XLR inputs, which you will need to plug in professional podcast microphones. And the FX-30, just like the A6700, also has 4K at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. That is also downsampled from 6K with 4K at 120 with a 1.6 times crop. Now technically you could add XLRs to your camera using an interface, but it gets a bit clunky by having to buy another thing for your camera, and overall it's just not as cost efficient. So if you're a podcaster looking for a simple setup, the FX-30 is not only the lowest price point for a podcasting camera like this, but it's also the most efficient in terms of what you get, and it has the simplest setup. Now, one form of YouTube that is currently exploding, and I personally believe is the future of YouTube, is cinematic content. Now, there's a lot of really good cinema cameras out there, but there's really only two that meet the criteria of what creators need in terms of design and workflow. And the first one is the Canon R6 Mark II. Now, this is a chunky, big boy camera, and the size may not be ideal for everyone, but I promise you the specs in this camera more than make up for the size. One of the reasons that I often recommend Canon cameras to creators is because of the in-camera colors. These colors are really easy to work with, but they also look really good on faces and skin tone. So if you're someone that's going to be on camera a lot, it's nice to feel confident on camera by knowing that you'll always look good on camera. On top of that, the colors themselves are really easy to color grade and play around with because you have such a good starting point. And the Canon R6 Mark II also has C-Log 3 built in for extended dynamic range and more flexibility with your colors. And inside the R6 Mark II, you have a 24 megapixel full frame sensor that can shoot 4K at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second that is downsampled from 6K resolution. And when it comes to making something look cinematic, color grading is usually what people notice first, and you can usually take a pretty bland image and make it look cinematic with the right color grade. Now, I actually happen to own the R6 Mark II, and one of the reasons I picked up this camera is because of how good it is in photos. It can shoot 12 frames per second in mechanical shutter mode and a ridiculous 40 frames per second in electronic shutter mode. Usually as a YouTuber, you really need to focus on your thumbnails and you always need to take photos for social media. And I wanted to have a camera that can both do video really well, but also perform when it comes to photos. Which is why I think the R6 Mark II is one of the best hybrid cameras for YouTubers. But if you want something that's more video focused, the most popular and easiest to recommend cameras out there are the Sony A7S III and the Sony FX-30. But they cost an arm and a leg, and a lot of times YouTubers don't really need all of that stuff in those cameras. Luckily for us, we can actually get the same performance as those cameras at half the price and in a body and design that's actually better suited for us. And that is the Sony ZV-E1. The ZV-E1 has a 12 megapixel full frame sensor, which is the same sensor from the A7S III and the FX-30, but with a faster processor that has a few really interesting tricks up its sleeve. One of them being AI-based autofocus that can intelligently track subject matter like people, animal, cars, insects, birds, and the list goes on. But it's a really solid autofocusing system and it's never going to let you down. And because of the design of this body, it's actually the same design as the ZV-E10 and the ZV-1. So you can use this camera as a talking head camera, as a vlogging camera, as a cinematic camera, and it's really nice to know you have this super robust autofocusing system that's going to work in all of those scenarios. And in terms of frame rates, the ZV-E1 can shoot 4K at 24, 30, 60, all the way to 120 frames per second. And it can also do full HD at 240 frames per second. If you're a cinematic filmmaker, you know how powerful slow motion can be, and this is one of the best slow motion video cameras out there. Color grading is really important when it comes to making your videos look cinematic, and the ZV-E1 not only has S-Log 3 and color profiles built in, but it also has the same cinematic vlog mode from the ZV-1. This way you can get a really cool cinematic look right in camera with just a few clicks, and this is a really powerful tool, especially for beginners. I mentioned earlier that the ZV-E1 has the same design as the ZV line of cameras, so not only do you get a built-in microphone, but you get the same simple one-button switch to go between photo, video, and slow motion. You also get a one-click solution for getting more background blur, and overall, it's just a super small camera that is perfect for vlogging. This is literally the do-it-all camera. The one problem with the ZV-E1 is that it does tend to overheat. In 4K at 24 or 30 frames per second, you'll get about an hour, but after that, you'll probably start to overheat, and if you do want, they actually make really good third-party fans for this camera that will extend the runtime of these cameras to pretty much unlimited. So if you want a powerful video camera that's really made for cinematic content with YouTubers and creators in mind in terms of design, the ZV-E1 and the R6 Mark II are phenomenal cameras, but regardless of whatever camera you pick up, make sure to get the best possible price on your camera gear by checking out the links in the description down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.